So hi, everyone, and welcome to this session on automating data analysis and workflows with pyODK. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to fill out a little demo survey that we're going to use as sample data with when I start actually demonstrating. My name is Hélène Martin. I lead a lot of the technical work on ODK, and I'm here today with Yao Anakwa, who is one of the founders of ODK and also leads the project. So here's my rough game plan. We're going to start with an intro. I'm going to tell you a little bit about ODK Central, about Python, and about the environment I'm going to be using to show examples called Jupyter Lab. Then we're going to do some live coding, again, with some data from the forum that hopefully many of you are filling out now. I'm going to introduce to you the methods that we've designed for pyODK, and we're going to use that in the context of doing some data analysis, working with submissions that you all have made. We're going to take a little shift away from pyODK and get to know the ODK Central API documentation so that you can use that as a resource. And then we're going to do some more examples that are focused on automating workflows. And for that, we're going to use some methods in pyODK that we call the HTTP verb methods. So hopefully that sounds good to everybody. And Yao, are you able to say hello? No. Okay, so Yao is not currently able to. Oh, here you are.
Can I unmute now?
It looks like you can.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And I'm really excited about the pyODK demo that Hélène has prepared. Like I said on Twitter and LinkedIn, I saw a sneak peek, and it's going to be pretty wild. So I'll be here mostly silent and facilitating. Remember, if you have questions, drop it into the Q&A section of the chat, and I'll do my best to facilitate that so that Hélène can focus on sharing the great content whilst I focus on the answers. So again, nice to see everybody. And yeah, let's get started, Hélène.
Great, thanks so much, Yao. Kind of learning to use this webinar software on the fly here. We're used to using Zoom, but not in webinar mode. So bear with us a little bit. Thank you so much, Yao. So as he said, he's going to be facilitating. And so I'm not necessarily going to be monitoring the chat or the Q&A, but I'm going to pause frequently and I'm going to ask him to relay your questions. So please use the Q&A feature, use the chat, and let's take advantage of the fact that this is a live session. How to use this session? I would recommend using it as a jumping off point. So I would not encourage you to try to type along with me. I think I'm going to be going probably a little bit fast for that, but we will share out the recording and we're going to share out some links that you can also use to dive deeper afterwards. So again, when I say a jumping off point, I mean, take notes on what you think is particularly interesting to you, and then you'll be able to come back and scrub through the recording to go straight to that part, or dig through some of the examples that I'll show you and link you to. Again, ask questions using Zoom's Q&A, please, and we'll make sure that we get those answered. I like to make this really clear. Take what you need and leave what you don't. There's going to be a lot of different ideas that I share here. A lot of them I think are pretty cool, but just because it's so cool doesn't mean that it solves an actual problem that you have. So, make a note of it. But if you already have workflows and analysis pipelines that work well for you, don't feel like you have to jump on this just because it's the new thing. I'm going to add one thing about my goals here. As a lot of you know, pyODK is very new, and we have kept it minimal so far. And what we want to do is get as much feedback as we can as we expand it to make sure it's useful for everybody. So as you're listening along, make note of things that you would like for the library to do. Let us know, and we'll add that in. All right. We asked some questions when you were registering. That was very helpful. Thank you for filling that out. And I wanted to share a little bit about this group here, because it will give you a sense of kind of how I'm structuring what I'm talking about. So what we learned is most of you have used Central. Many of you have used the API as well. That's great. So you'll have a lot of context already. That said, 30% of you have actually used neither. So we have this split audience. I'm going to try to give enough information, enough context for everybody to come along. If you feel like I'm going too fast or you need some clarification, use the chat, use the Q&A. I asked about the number of submissions. Most of you are working with under 10,000 submissions, but there are about 7% of you who are working with over 100,000 submissions routinely. The techniques that I show you will best work with kind of smaller data sets. They probably take you to about 100,000, but beyond that, you'll want to do some more involved things like downloading the data in chunks and things like that. I'll call out when you might want to do that and hope to have some examples soon. I also asked about Python experience. About 25% of you have not used Python before, 50% have used small programs, have written small programs, I'm sorry, and 25 have written very large ones. Again, kind of a split audience. I'm going to be going mostly for the middle, but even if you've never seen Python before, I think you'll find that it's pretty straightforward to read at least. Here's a little word cloud of the responses to the open question of what you want to learn. Good news is we're going to definitely talk about pyODK. You talked about data analysis, about workflows, about automation. These are all things that I'll make sure are front and center. I don't know that I'll talk about everything, but we'll try to do that. For those of you who may not be very familiar with ODK, ODK provides end-to-end system for building powerful forms and collecting the data that you need wherever it happens to be. So the mobile client ODK Collect works offline first, and we have a server, ODK Central, that lets you capture the data. The original name of ODK is Open Data Kit. There are different components that work together. For those of you who haven't used ODK Central, I'm guessing you're using ODK compatible servers, or maybe you're using ODK Aggregate, which was the original ODK server. So ODK Central, if you haven't used it before, has a number of nice properties to it. We make real-time analysis and dashboarding nice and easy through Power BI and through Excel. And so that means you can have a connection directly to the data that can be updated. In the same vein, we try to make integrations and automation really straightforward. That's what we're going to be talking about today. You get full API access, and we support a number of standards, including OData. That's what makes the link to Power BI and Excel possible. We've tried to make it a really nice platform for working at scale. We have project isolation, so that means that forms are grouped in projects. We also group app users by project. So again, you have this kind of isolation. App users are used to connect with ODK Collect, and they have QR codes to make really nice, straightforward device provisioning. We also have some features to make sure that data is high quality, which is important, particularly at scale, to be able to do within the server. So that's things like the review workflow. We try to focus on traceability as well, making sure that everything that happens on the server is visible in some way. There's a server level audit log that lets you see who logged in when a form was created, when a form was deleted, so you can tell the full story of what happened on your server. We also show a submission level feed that shows a difference. If there are any edits, you can see that difference, you can really trace it, and you can feel like you know what's happening with your data. We aim also to be secure by default. So that's things like you have to use SSL. We also provide features like one-click encryption for environments where you really can't trust the server. So hopefully that gives you an overview of what we think about as the important parts of ODK Central and the things that we try to focus on as we design it. It is open source, free to self-host, lots of people do. We also thought it was really important to provide a solid hosted solution from the core team for organizations that don't have the capacity to self-host or don't want to deal with the challenges that entails. And so we have ODK Cloud for that. All right, so I mentioned that one of the things that we like to focus on is integrations and kind of being able to work directly with the server. So this is very closely built into the way that ODK Central is structured. So here on the side, I put the ODK Central backend, that is the part that is actually storing your data and that provides an API. API is, think of it as, it's an interface, but it's not a user graphical interface. It's an interface for programs to work with. And we provide ODK Central Frontend, which is the part that you see in your web browser that lets you click around in your different projects and view your submissions. That's one way to interact with ODK Central Backend, but it's not the only way. So anything that the ODK Central Frontend does, any other program that you use or that you connect with can do those things. So that already should be pretty exciting. We think of ODK Central Frontend as a management view. So we want to help you manage your project. We want to help you make sure that the right people are getting the right forms, things like that. But we don't want to do analysis there. Our focus is really on helping you get the data collection workflow working as well as it can. I mentioned on the previous slide, we have these easy integrations with Excel and Power BI. We also have a Google Data Studio connector. The community has lots of really great tools to connect to your data, like QGIS plugins and others. This would be a type of connector to the backend that is targeting analysis. Today, we're going to talk about connecting to the ODK Central backend with a programming language, specifically Python, but in general, the concept is you're using a programming language to connect to the backend, and that lets you do both analysis and management tasks. And so there's a lot of power there. Again, I put ... like these are not the only ways you can connect to the ODK Central backend. There are many, including just with the web browser, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so hopefully it's pretty clear why you'd want to use a programming language to connect to ODK Central Backend if you have some workflow management tasks to do, right? If you have a programming language, you have loops, you have all these things that you can do to automate your workflows. But why use a programming language for analysis? Excel works really well. What might be the advantage of that? So here are some things that I see. I know a number of you on the call are data scientists, so I don't have to tell you that. But for those of you who are not, maybe you haven't thought about this a lot before. Here are some of the advantages. Transparency. It's really clear how you went from the raw data to whatever analysis product you have. In Excel, it might not be clear to somebody who looks at your analysis product how you actually got there. And similarly, reproducibility. Again, if you have very similar forms, maybe you want to use the same analysis. You can do that if you have your analysis written in a programming language. It's a lot harder if you're using something like Excel, which is point and click. That ties into reusability. So these are kind of similar themes. And efficiency, I think, as well. No matter how fast you get with point and click and drag, there's something really nice about being able to type in a command and immediately get feedback. I'll show you some of that in a moment. Why Python specifically? Python is a general purpose programming language, so it's really good for automation as well. I hope you'll find that it is kind of conversational and fun, especially for simple scripting. It's very approachable. It also has many tools for data science, for machine learning, so you're well served in that area. A lot of people use R, so you might know there's a wonderful library produced by a community member, Florian, called pyODK. If you're comfortable in R, fantastic. You know, that's a really great option. More and more people are using R for general purpose computing, so you know, I think there's a lot of potential there, and some of the ideas that I show today will very much be applicable to pyODK as well. So we are trying to provide lots of options for people to meet them where their skills are. Today, I'm going to be showing a bunch of examples, and I'm going to do that in an environment called Jupyter Lab. Hopefully that's familiar to some of you. If not, that might be the big takeaway from today's session, is that there is this cool environment and this type of computing, which is very interactive notebook driven. So I think this notebook driven concept comes from Mathematica, if anybody used that a while ago. Well, it's still around, but R and Jupyter have kind of taken over. So the idea of having a notebook is similar to a scientist's notebook, where you're taking some notes, you're trying some things, and you'll see a very, very nice way to do some prototyping and to talk about the code that you're doing. So great for these kinds of demos, for example. Jupyter Lab is one of the environments for working with Jupyter notebooks, which I'm going to show them in Python, but actually also can use R or another language called Julia. If you want to check out Jupyter Lab, there's some great documentation. Especially I recommend taking the time to watch the Getting Started video. I'm going to be running Jupyter Lab locally, and that's nice if you're actually putting in your ODK Central credentials, but there are also some cloud options. I put some links there. Those are all options for editing notebooks. There are other things that you might be interested in kind of in this general space for editing notebooks. Visual Studio Code is a great local application that lets you get up and running with notebooks pretty quickly. If you're using R, everybody swears by RStudio, so definitely check it out. And then there's some new tools for publishing the results of publishing notebooks like Quarto. Okay, with that, let me pause a second to see if there are any questions, and then we'll start doing some demos. Great. So as a reminder, here's a game plan. We've gone through our intro. You'll learn a little bit about ODK Central, Python, Jupyter Lab, so hopefully that gives some nice context. And now we're going to dive into using pyODK and actually doing some bit of data analysis. Okay, so let me get here to Central first. Okay, so before I dive into my notebook, I'm going to give you some context on where we are. And if you haven't seen Central before, here it is. Okay, so this is a sandbox server that I use for demos and things like that. And here you can see that I have 3 projects that I can see. So I have one for our webinar today called pyODK Webinar. And then a couple other projects that I have access to. I'm logged in with a special user for webinar admin. And so there may be other projects on the server. I don't know. This is the view that I have. Let's click into the project for our session here. And let's see the survey that you all have been filling out. So great. I see 30 submissions. That's wonderful. Thank you all for doing that. There are a couple other forms in here. So I'm going to jump to my submissions directly. And here they are. So like I mentioned, with Central, we provide you a management interface. So we let you set up your forms. We let you set access to the forms. But we don't really want to do the analysis here. We just provide this view so you can see the submissions. You can quickly review them or edit them. But for serious analysis, you go to some other system. All right, so this is ODK Central front end. I mentioned that the front end is separate from the back end and that we can use a web browser to talk to the back end. So let me show you something here. In the URL, we have a hash. Okay, so when we have this hash, we're talking to the front end. We're asking the front end to show us something. If we change the hash to a v1, now we're talking to the back end. We're doing a direct request to the back end here. Whoa, so what did we get? We got some JSON back, and my browser is nicely formatting that. And so you can see this is all of the submissions that are being shown on that front end page. All right, and it's metadata. So we have the instance ID and the created app. It's not very convenient for a human to browse. So generally, you probably want to stay here. But I did want to show you that you can actually see what backend serves very easily in your browser. Let me actually show you really quickly one context in which I do sometimes use this. If you go to more here, you have the details about a specific submission. We can do this V1 trick and see the metadata about the submission. And I'll show you how you can do this in pyODK in just a moment. You can also add .xml here, and this is going to show you the raw submission as it came in from Enketo or from Collect. So that can be nice sometimes for troubleshooting, for just making sure that you know exactly what came in from your client. So this is a nice trick that I feel is useful to know. All right, so you're getting the sense here that anything that you can do in front end is powered by backend, and you can access the backend directly, including with your browser. Let's see how we do that in pyODK. Okay, so here we go. We are in Jupyter Lab. Jupyter Lab is this web-based computing environment, as I was saying. I'm running it locally. Again, there are some links on the slides that we'll share out if you want to try it in the cloud. Make sure you're thoughtful about where you're putting your ODK Central credentials. So if you're using a public system, maybe that is not appropriate. Maybe you want to make sure you're using a test project to do that. But here I'm local. I'm going to create a new Python notebook. And here we are. A notebook is organized as a series of cells that you can run. Cells can contain either code or text, which is styled with Markdown. There's a kind of convention in programming to always start with hello world. So since some of you haven't seen Python before, let's do our hello world. I can write any Python code here. When I'm ready to run it, I hit play, and here we go. So print is a Python function that just gives us back the text that we put in the parentheses. And so we see it here, hello world. Great. So this is giving you a feel, hopefully, for this notebook environment. Again, think of a scientist notebook, you jot down some notes, and then you see what the results are. Okay, pyODK. This is what you actually want to see, right? Enough with the background information. Let's do it. I need to start by importing the library. So I'm going to import the client class, which is what I'm going to use to be generally interacting with the ODK Central API. So a client is anything that can connect to another software system. Okay, I have to build a client. So I'm going to say my client equals client. I need to open this client before I can use it. This is creating some resources that I'll be using. You'll notice I'm never going to close this. In a Jupyter notebook, we are just going to be running these cells separately. There isn't really kind of an ongoing program, so we don't really have to clean up resources. But if you are writing a big program, you would want to close. And now we're ready to make calls to the backend using the client. We have organized the methods in pyODK according to the resources that they relate to. So let me start by listing projects. So I'm going to say client.projects.list. We hit this play, and cool, here we are. We see the projects in a list. The brackets here show that this is a Python list. And then here we have project. This is a Python object of type project. You can see, for example, that created at here is of type date time. So we can do some nice things here because these are all Python objects with nice types. Great. This is the same as, let's go back to our front end, going to our project. And here we can say V1. Okay. Oh, sorry, I did a project list. What am I doing? Right. Sorry. V1 projects. There we go. So this is the same thing as if we were doing that. It turns out for the front end, we are making this request when we are viewing the landing screen. So you saw I had to think for a second that the request is actually to v1/projects. But anyway, you don't have to know those details. I'm just kind of trying to make this as not magical as possible. Now, hopefully, though, some of you are thinking like, wait a minute, there's a lot of pieces missing. How did it know to connect to that server? How did it know to list the projects in this context? So yes, let me go through that in a little bit more detail. When I built the client, this used a default file that configures the server. It's in my home directory. So I'm going to switch over to the pyODK GitHub page to show you a little bit more about configuration. Here's a little tip. I don't know if you've seen this, but each page on GitHub has a table of contents. So we're going to skip down to configuration. And so this is describing how to configure these client objects. And it's telling you that the default file name is .pyconfig.toml. Default location is in the home directory. So when you build a client, just client parenthesis, it's going to go and it's going to find this default config file, and it's going to use the credentials that are in there to connect. And so before we started this, I set up this file in my home directory to be ready to go. We do this because we don't want to have any risk of you leaving credentials in a script that you share. So you have to use this config file. It's secure. If you put it in your home directory, it's going to be very hard for others to access. And so we want to make sure that you are accessing your ODK Central server in a safe way. Now, to make this a little bit less magical, let me actually build a configuration with you. Okay, so we go back here, you can see that you can actually pass a path at initialization so that you can see that file and have it feel a little bit less magical. So let me copy this here and create a new file. And I'm going to call this config.toml. Toml is a configuration language. And it has some nice properties, but it doesn't matter too much. I mean, you can just copy and paste this basic configuration and fill in your details. So there are 4 properties that we can set. The first one is base URL. That's going to correspond to the server that you work on. So here, coming back to my server, I'm going to copy this first part here, and I'm going to paste that in right there. So that's the base URL of the server I'm working with. I put in my username. Here I've created a special account just here for, that I can share with you all safely. So here's a nice little trick. You can use a plus sign for most email providers to add a tag to an email address. So we can do ln plus, I think I called it webinar viewer at getodk.org. And my password is a bad password. So there they are, the credentials. You can go and you can log in if you really want to, but you're just going to be a viewer. Default project ID is optional. So if you leave that blank, you're going to always have to explicitly set the project when you do different calls using pyODK methods. But it's convenient to set, that way you don't have to specify it when you're doing calls on forms or submissions. So let's set it. I want to be working in the pyODK webinar project. And so I can use the URL here to see what the project ID is. In this case, it's 52. So I'm going to paste this in. All right, so this is my config.toml file. And we're going to build a new client that connects using that config file so you can see really explicitly what's happening. Let's call it viewer client. So you can have multiple clients if you want. So if you have multiple central servers that you use in different contexts, great, you can connect to both of them side by side and do things like copy submissions from one to another, which is something I was doing yesterday. Okay, so when we build the client, we say config path, and it's in the same directory, so I can just put the file name. And when you're configuring multiple clients, you also want to specify a cache path. The cache is used for storing your client secret. You don't have to worry too much about this, but basically when you log in, you're using your username and password one time, and then you get back a token that you can use to do the request after this. All right, so there's my viewer client. Let's not forget to open it. And let's also now list the projects here. I did a little shortcut. I didn't press the play button. I did Control Enter. And so you're going to see me doing that for now. It's a little bit faster. I can hit Control Enter, and that's going to run the current cell that I'm in. Okay, so what are we seeing here? So we have now oh, it's not what I was expecting, as you can see. And hopefully a lot of you have spotted this and are feeling very uncomfortable right now. I did client.projects.list. That's not what I wanted to do. Viewer client.projects.list is what I meant to do. This is what I expected. So this user has less access. It only can see one project, only the project that we're working on. And so here that's reflected in the list that we see here. Let me pause for 1 second and see if there are any questions, Yao, that I should answer now.
Yes, Hélène, there's one question about, actually two questions, one about whether or not this will work with Kobo or ONA, and then another question about using a tool like python.env, which is a tool that might help people not leak credentials.
Okay, great, thanks. So this is only going to work with ODK Central or other systems that, other backends that exactly have the same API. So Kobo and ONA do not, so they would have to have their own bridge between their backends and Python. So pyODK specifically for ODK Central. A lot of the ideas that I'll be showing in a moment, though, will work with other servers. Now, in terms of using python.env, yeah, so that's interesting. So environment variables are generally considered not to be secure. So the recommendation is to read directly from files. You can also set an environment variable for a path. So if you want to have kind of like a default place that you store your credentials, you could set an environment variable that says go here rather than in my home directory. Oh, and I see a quick question here. Is it possible to use pyODK to do all the Central API does? Yes, and I'll be showing more of that and how you can use the Central API docs as we move forward. Great. Okay, so we've listed projects. I mean, it's cool, but maybe not exactly what you were hoping to get out of all this. So let's get into more details. I'm going to add another cell, and I'm going to keep going with the different resources that we can access from here. So we've got projects. The other big one is going to be forms, right? You're probably not going to be surprised to know that you can also list forms. Again, I did my Control Enter trick to make sure that I can run the cell. So I'm listing the forms. You can see this is what we were seeing in the front end. There's a favorite foods form, a pyODK webinar participant survey, and a simple repeat survey. Okay. All right. We're getting close to, I think, where you want to be, which is submissions. We can also list submissions. And remember, here I'm just putting paren, so this means it's using my default project. Oops. Oh, sorry. I'm using my default project, but you can see here I got an error. No form ID was provided. I have to make sure that I also provide a form ID as context. So we do have a default project, but we don't have a default form. So let me do form ID equals participants, which is the form that all of you were filling out. Great. So this shows me the metadata for all of these submissions, the instance ID, who submitted it, or the ID of the person who submitted it, the created at. Again, these are all nice Python objects. Okay, so we're getting closer, but this is still just metadata. There's a lot you can do with this, though. You could do some dashboarding. You could do some analysis on this metadata to see who's making submissions at what time. But for the most part, I think when people are thinking about analysis, they are thinking about the actual submissions content, right? So client.submissions.getTable is where we want to be for that. And so we're going to set a form ID of participants. Okay. Woo, all right, so this now is giving us the data. Great. It's giving us the data, though, as a raw JSON object. And so some of you may be thinking, great, I know how to work with that, let's go. Wonderful. But if you're thinking, this is not so useful, let's get into a library that's going to help us analyze this a little bit better. And first, I want to point out that here we have value as a top level key. This is because this is an OData standard JSON document. So at the bottom, we have some OData context that's provided. We, for analysis, are not going to want to do that. So I'm going to do value here. Okay. And I'm going to store this in a variable called JSON. So I'm saving this response. All I'm doing here with the value is I'm saving the list that's inside. Okay. Now, I'm going to use a library called Pandas to do this, this analysis. So Pandas has PD. So Pandas is a library that is specifically designed to store and let you manipulate and analyze large amounts of data. We import it as PD, so it's easier to type in. Pandas has some data structures that are really efficient for representing data, like the one from this form. We're going to use a data frame here. And so we're going to use this JSON that we got from our client and create a data frame using a function called JSON normalize. So I pass in my JSON, and let's see what happens here. Okay, well, nothing, because I just saved it in a variable. Here, there we go. Wonderful. So this is the representation of a data frame that a Jupyter notebook gives us, which is very nice and really gives us some nice insights already. I'm going to hide my left toolbar so we can see even more of it. Cool. So great. Thank you so much for filling this in. I'm so glad that some of you have a favorite book of ODK documentation. It is one of my personal favorites too. Probably the one I've spent the most time reading. But so here you can already see a nice overview of your data. This is a lot to kind of scroll through. So a nice trick is you can say here, I only want to see the top, say, 3 rows. And so this gives us a sense of the shape of the data and what's in it. Okay, cool. What did JSON normalize do? Well, it flattened the JSON that we got. So you may have noticed when it was up on the screen that we had some nested structures, some groups. So if you have a group in your form, using JSON normalize is going to flatten it so you can have a single table. We also have a system group that provides some information about when the form was edited, who submitted it, and so on. That got flattened as well. It got flattened with a dot in between the group and the actual property. And so if you want to change that, you can also specify a separator. So I like to use a dash to match the export from Central. Okay, so now you can see liked dash type, system dash updated at. So you have there's some nice configurability there. Great. Okay, so now we're in Pandas, and I don't want to make this entirely a Pandas tutorial. There's more I want to show you about pyODK, but I want to give you a taste of what you can do. So let's say we want to find out whether people here like feet or meters more. We can do height units, and we can use value counts, which is again something from Pandas. And Pandas also lets us use the column names here as properties. And I'm just going to go ahead and plot it right away. I'm going to plot this as a pie plot. Ooh, so this is coming to the efficiency I was talking about. Some of you, I bet, are really, really fast at doing this kind of thing with Excel. But there's something really nice about being able to type it in and keep it in this notebook so you have a record of what you tried. And then, it's nice and easy to share with others. We can also edit it really easily. So let's say, okay, so that's cool. So we see that there's a slight bias towards meters. Excellent. Maybe we want to find out if people have pets. So we can just change which column we're doing this analysis on, and boom. And interestingly, it's a very similar look. So maybe people who like meters don't have pets or something like that. I want to note this is using the full data set, not just the 3 that we're showing here. Great. So there's, interestingly enough, there are a lot of pets, but not everyone has pets. I don't have pets. Another nice thing that we can do in Pandas is describe numeric columns. So we have height, and I use the ODK form to normalize that to meters, but you could also do it in Pandas if you wanted. I'm going to use this describe here to get some basic information about that column. Nice, right? Again, some of you are probably really fast at doing that with graphical interfaces. But the nice thing here is you can keep your scratch work as a series of cells and kind of have this nice summary. So great, 34 people answered our survey. And the mean height is 1 meter 74 centimeters. And here we can see our standard deviation, our minimum, and some more information here. Great. We could do some more analysis here, but I guess I want to make sure that we have time for some other things. Any questions I can answer here?
Yeah, Len, we have a question from about whether or not pyODK deals with nested data like group repeats.
Yes, great. Thanks. Let me show you. Oh, I think I was muted, but yes, let me show you. And actually, let me show you one more thing that you can do here to make it clear. You can also analyze your metadata. So the things in the system group. I'll show you. There is a limitation here. We won't be able to use this dot notation here because we have special characters in the name here, but I can use this kind of dictionary dereferencing syntax. Yeah, can we count submitter name? That's what I'm going to show you. You read my mind. Let's do it. So yeah, let's do a bar graph showing us who submitted the data. Okay, cool. Great. So you can see I filled out some things myself using my personal account. Oh, I also had a collect QR code that I was trying out yesterday that submitted, I think, once. As an organizer, I was trying things out yesterday. This is a public access link like the one that the participants use. So there's a mix of data from different places. There's so much you can do here. If you're interested, you can learn a lot more about Pandas and about graphing. But like, for example, I can rotate my my labels here. There's a lot. Great. All right. You asked about repeats. I do think that that's important. Let me try to do that relatively quickly so I can show a little bit about workflow automation. All right, so I've got another form on my server that's called simple repeat, and I'm going to do the same kind of thing I just did with pulling the data down, but I'm going to do it for both the base form and for the repeat. Okay, I'm going to go quickly and just to give you a taste of what that looks like. Submissions. So I'm going to get the table. Form ID is going to be simple repeat. And I'm going to build a base data frame for that. Same JSON normalized that I'd done before. Base form. Oh, remember, we just want the things inside of value. So I could do that here. Let me do the same separator using a dash. Okay. One of the things we're going to do here. Okay, so this is my base data form. So you can see this is a simple form. It's asking us which session, the day, the name of the person collecting the data, and then we're going to see that the repeat has some observations. And one thing that we are going to do here that's going to be important for working with repeats is we're going to set an index. And what that does is tell Pandas that a particular row, a particular column should be treated as the kind of the unique identifier of that row. If you've used databases, you're very familiar with this concept. So I'm going to set the index, and I have to be really careful. Most things in Pandas don't modify the data frame. They give you back a new data frame so you can have the full history of what you did. In this case, I'm just going to use the same data frame. So I'm going to set the index here in place. Let's see that data frame. There it is. And you can see that Pandas shows us that this is now the index. Okay, so I'll have a worked example that you can see more details on, but this is the basics of what we need to do. Now let me pull in the repeat. Same thing, client.submissions.get table. The form ID is simple repeat. And I'm going to specify a table name. The table name is going to be the name of the repeat with submissions dot in front of it. I know my repeat is called observation. You'd have to look at the form definition for that. And that's going to give me the JSON for all of the submissions. Let me do a repeat data frame. Same thing we've been doing. JSON normalize, repeat value. We'll do the same separator of dash. Okay, so this is our repeat data frame. Let's look at it. Okay, cool. So the thing that we saw, how many we saw, and maybe some notes. Let me get that on the same screen here as our base. Okay, so our base form has the ID here, which is now the index. And you can see that these IDs match with submission ID here. And so what we want to do is a join between this ID and this submission ID. Let's do that. Actually, I'm going to keep the data here so you can see it. I'm going to do joined equals repeat data frame dot join. I specify the other table, which is my base data frame. And I say which column I want to join on. Submissions ID. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. And so this did the join. And so you can see now we have what we were seeing in the repeat data frame, but augmented with the data from the base. Now you may think like, okay, yes, that was fast, but of course it's a very small data set. Yes, but Pandas is designed to be really efficient and it will do these kinds of things very quickly. For those of you who are working with around 10,000 submissions, this is going to work really nicely for you. Great, so now we have it joined. We can start answering interesting questions about this data. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go straight to kind of showing you what the something like a pivot table would look like. I'm going to give you some more work examples, but we can use grouped by to deal with to represent data based on multiple indexes, for example. Okay, so here we go. What did I do? Oops. Group die. No, group by. There we go. So, cool. Here we've got this little kind of pivot table like thing. There is also a pivot table method, which lets you do this similar kind of work. But you can see a nice summary by both data collector and the thing that they saw and the sum of the counts. Great. All right, so this is very analysis focused. I want to give you a taste for how you can also do some workflow automation. And some of this is not yet fully in the pyODK library. And so we're going to kind of use the API documentation and some generic methods that we have in the library to do that. Okay, so sorry, I'm wrestling with my Zoom bar here. All right, so we're going to go to the ODK Central docs to take a look at how this API is set up. So the API docs are here. If you're mostly doing analysis, you probably don't need to look at them. But right now, if you're doing more workflow type things, you might want to get familiar with them. This documentation is, again, organized by resource, the kind of thing that you're manipulating. So, for example, accounts and users. Let's maybe automate creating app users. So where you might want to do workflow automation is where the central front end doesn't quite let you work at the scale that you want to. So we know that, for example, when you have many, many app users, the front end is not so convenient to use. So let's script that. So we can use the ODK Central API docs to see how we would create app users. So we have accounts and users, app users. Same kind of thing. We can list all app users. Again, that's not yet directly in pyODK, but we can use the docs to build that request, essentially. So here, when we see the documentation for a particular part of the API, we see a verb like get or post. That's called the HTTP verb. That's what we're going to use to make our request from pyODK. And then we're going to copy the last part of the path here into our pyODK request. Okay, let me show you what that looks like. So pyODK has methods that are like get that let you directly use a request to the API using the credentials that you have configured. You'll have to put in your project ID every time though. So here's an example. I can do pyodk.get projects. I remembered that that was 52 app users. I'm going to get a raw Python response from that. If you don't know how to work with that, no problem. In general, you can say, just give me the JSON, and that will tell you, give you nicely formatted JSON. So here we go as an example of getting a app user. Great. I said I was going to create an app user. Let's see how we do that from the ODK Central docs. Create a new app user. Oh, it's the exact same path, but just with the post method. And we also have to specify a display name. Okay. So using that information, I can come back to my notebook and say something like client.post projects 52 app users. And I have to make sure that I also specify in JSON the display name. And I can do that as a Python dictionary. Display name. And we'll call it webinar. That's the name of our app user. Okay, so let me look at what's going on in Central. I have app users. I just have an app user called collect. And so my goal here is to create a webinar app user. I've formulated my request using this generic post and copying in the path from the API documentation. Let's run it. Okay, I get response 200. So for those of you who are familiar with APIs, you know that's a good thing. And let's see here what we have. We have our webinar web user. So to the person who was asking, can you do everything that you can do in ODK Central front end in pyODK or through some connector library? The answer is absolutely yes, and more. Now you can imagine you can have a list of different app users you want to create, and you can build a loop around that, and you can build 100 app users very easily. I'll share out a script that does just that, and then also provides all of the QR codes to provision devices with those app users. All right, so I know that that was a lot, and that again, it went fairly quickly, but I'm hoping that this gave you a good taste of what you can do with pyODK and with the ODK Central API. So we started out looking at ODK Central, giving a little bit of background on that. We went into how we can use pyODK and the design methods to see a lot of what's going on with our projects, with our forms, with our submissions. We dove into using Pandas to actually see our submissions in a nice table and do a bit of analysis. And then we closed off here with showing you how you can access any functionality from the ODK Central API through these HTTP GET, POST, and so on methods. I'm going to send out this video as well as links to various resources that dive in deeper. Again, I hope that this is a useful jumping off point and that we can continue the conversation on the forum and mostly on the forum. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I have a few more minutes if you want to stick around and ask more questions. Thanks so much for participating.
Hélène, thank you so much for that. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. Can you see those and address them?
Okay. All right. And thank you for all the great questions. So what time does ODK Central show when a data collector submit data? Is it local time or any other time zone? All right, so we store the dates in UTC and front end displays them according to your time zone. And so if you're connecting to the API, you will get them in UTC. So you can see here, for example, this app use. Oh no, you cannot see. What am I saying? Let me share my screen again. Okay, so we just created an app user, for example, here, right? And here's the timestamp at which it was created. It ends with Z. That is the time zone indicator. It is in UTC. And so you'll see that almost all of the time zones that you get are have this Z suffix. All right, here's another question. Is this helpful for data cleaning? Yes. So a lot of people do their data cleaning in Pandas in various ways. So you can build your whole pipeline off of live data coming straight from ODK Central. That would be appropriate if you have probably under 10,000 or so submissions. And it's really quick to get into pyODK. You would probably want to avoid that if it takes 3 minutes to update or something like that. It actually really depends on what your needs are. But yes, once you are in Pandas, you can do all kinds of cleaning. You can identify outliers. You can do some automatic transformations. So things like, what do you do with blank values? Okay, maybe you change them to unknown, or maybe you transform values to scale them up or something like that. So you can do all of that in Pandas. You can basically build a pipeline of operations that modify the data in various ways and give you a clean data set to do your analysis on. Absolutely. Can Python help to transfer the data from Central to Salesforce? Yes, so you can do this kind of thing with any programming language, but yes, with Python and with pyODK, you'll be able to pull in your submissions. Maybe you even use Pandas for that in order to do the reshaping. Maybe you do some cleaning before you send it to another system. But then, yes, you would have to use the API of whatever system you're sending to do the next part. But yes, you can do that. I was saying earlier, I said I was transferring data between one central server and another yesterday. So that's another kind of thing you can do between central servers. It's easy because it's the same API, but you can absolutely send to any other kind of service that takes in data. Great. All right. Any other questions that I can answer here? Okay, I see. Can we delete a specific entry? So not currently. So sorry, what am I trying to say? Yes, we don't expose everything in the backend API. Deleting submissions is a dangerous operation. We know it's important in some contexts, and so it's something that we want to do. We want to do it right. The same way that with forms, we have an area where we show a the forms that were deleted, and we don't delete them right away. We keep them in quarantine, and then we clean them up. We want to do something like that. Let's see, I think I have some more questions in here. Oh. Okay, I saw a question, how would you recommend learning more? And I think that's a great one. Like I said, I think this is a jumping off point. So hopefully it gives you a taste of what you can do and it makes you hungry for more. I'm going to link to some general resources about things like Pandas for data cleaning, for example. We can absolutely do some more sessions if there are particular topics that you're interested in diving in deeper in, let us know.
Are we going to do more sessions like this?
Yeah, so if there's a particular topic you want to dive in deeper in, let us know, and then yes, I think we can try to do some more sessions. A good question here. Do you recommend having some kind of database in between Central and the visualization platform, or can we use Central as a main backend? Again, it depends on the size of your data and it depends on what you need to do with it. So it is okay to use Central as your source of truth, and a lot of people do that. So in that case, it would be totally appropriate to do exactly this kind of workflow that I showed in the notebook for your main analysis. In some cases, though, you may have some warehousing needs that are not exactly met by Central. You could have a layer in between. So that is really going to be very dependent on your situation. You may still want to do this kind of notebook-driven exploration, even if you do have a database layer. Maybe what you want to do is, as the data comes in, you do some checks on a daily basis, you do some checks on a weekly basis to make sure that things are going well, so that you can talk to your enumerators if there are any outliers that are detected, things like that. And then at the very end, you put your final data set into your data warehouse and you do your visualization from there. So there are lots of different ways that you could structure that part. Is it possible to perform basic mapping like, okay, wait, oh, actually, let me, okay, how to download data without rejected entries? Great question. So let me show you, let me actually show you how to see some examples on the pyODK docs, and I'm going to be adding some more of that soon. So if you go to pyODK on GitHub, and you go to examples, it's also linked from the README, you'll see various things that are actually very similar to some of the things I showed you today. And if I remember correctly, in working with repeats, I did filter out rejected submissions. So this is not currently loading, but you can look at these examples and you'll see that you can do it. So when you get table, it is one of the parameters that you have is filter, and you can filter based on status. Is it possible to perform basic mapping like heat map? So it's too bad that I'm having trouble loading this, because I wanted to also show you an example here. Looks like maybe GitHub's having some issues. But okay, so I put this in my basic analysis with Pandas. At the bottom, I do have a mapping example, very simple mapping example. But you can also do heat maps, and you can also do very complex maps with base maps and interactivity. So there's a lot that you can do with mapping, absolutely. And again, if that's an area that you have particular interest in, we could consider diving a little bit deeper there, and I'll send out some resources. Okay, so the sort of the entity based data collection, how does that relate to pyODK? So our kind of concept for entity-based data collection is to have dynamic, sorry, it looks like GitHub's not quite working right now, so I'll just come here. So entity-based data collection. The first thing that we're doing is we're doing dynamically updating data set attachments, so CSV attachments. And so that is basically going to be pushing some things that people are now doing in their own scripts, in their own code. So updating some kind of attachment into Central. So we're kind of, again, taking things that people are automating with pyODK or just with their own connectors and bringing that into Central. In terms of integration with pyODK, the same way that you can get a list of submissions, we'll be able to get a list of entities and analyze them in Pandas the same way that I showed today. Okay. Okay, great. I think these are all the questions that I'm seeing. Anybody else want to chime in with something? Yes, yeah, was a question.
Yes, so I wanted to, not really a question, more of a comment. I wanted to clarify for folks who are watching that we will be sending out a copy of both the video and the slide deck with links to some of the resources that we talked about and some of the answers. There will also be in the pyODK repo, there's an examples page that has example Jupyter notebooks of both the basic analysis with Pandas to shows you how to put those things together. It's got examples of the simple repeat of how you join data sets together. And then there's also an example of using sort of the more advanced mode that Hélène showed for creating resources like app users and automating more of ODK. And then the really exciting thing is that we are going to be building more and more of this functionality and providing nice wrappers for it. So your feedback is really critical in that. And I think, Hélène, you have a slide about that, maybe.
That's right. I did have a little conclusion that I didn't quite get to here. But these are the kind of my call to action. So I'd love for everybody to get involved. If you give us more insights into the data pipelines that you're trying to build and the points of friction, we can help make sure that pyODK addresses those. If there are workflows that you want to automate, you can tell us more about that. We can either point you to examples or, as Yao said, add more to the pyODK library to make those things easier. For example, one of the things I want to add very soon is a method built into pyODK that takes in a list of app user display names and just creates those app users. So you don't have to go to the API documentation and so on. So our goal is really to have this nice minimal set of methods that solve real problems. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so I think we are ready to wrap up. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you spending our time with us. If there are any other comments or questions, please share them on the forum, or you can always email me directly. I think I had my email here, ln@getodk.org.